Hector Salamanca can't walk, can't speak. One finger and a bell. That's the entire vocabulary left of a man who used to run people. Gus Fring could end this in 4 seconds. A pillow, a syringe, one word to the wrong nurse. Nobody would ask a single question. And yet Gus doesn't do it, not for years. So why? The easy answer is revenge, and the easy answer isn't wrong. But revenge has an ending. You get the moment, and you're done. Gus isn't done. He's still showing up. Still careful. Still somehow not satisfied. Like satisfaction was never actually the plan. Which means the man everyone thinks is punishing Hector might actually be needing him. So why would the most dangerous man in Breaking Bad need the one man he hates most to stay alive? Let's not dismiss the obvious answer too fast. It's not wrong, it's just incomplete. Hector helped kill Max. Gus was there, he watched. Every gut instinct you have says, of course he wants Hector to suffer for that. Slowly, on his own terms instead of Hector's. Sure, that gets you through year 1, maybe year 5. But it doesn't get you through year 8 or 9, or however long this actually goes. Because here's the thing about a man this controlled. A man who has spent his entire adult life making sure emotion never touches a single decision. He keeps making an exception. Same room, same wheelchair, same visit over and over like a ritual he can't skip. Revenge has a shape to it. It builds. It peaks. You get the moment you've been waiting for, and then it's over. You move on. Gus never moves on. He keeps circling back to a man who, by this point, physically cannot fight him. Which raises an ugly little possibility. What if the fight was never really the point? If revenge was supposed to end, and it clearly isn't ending, what's it actually doing for him instead? Here's where it gets interesting, because the real answer isn't about Hector, not yet anyway. It's about Max. Go back to that pool, Don Eladio's pool. That's the origin of everything you think you know about Gus. The stillness, the precision, the sense that nothing ever rattles him. All of it traces back to one moment. Hector, on Eladio's order, putting a gun to Max's head and pulling the trigger. Gus doesn't get to look away. Cartel men pin him to the deck, forcing him to watch as Max bleeds out beside him. He doesn't scream. He barely moves. He just stares. And that silence becomes the birth of everything you'll later mistake for calm. Something in Gus just stops. Right there. Not his ambition. That kept moving. Not his intelligence. If anything, that got sharper. What stops is something underneath all of it. The part of him that was ever allowed to just be a person, instead of a machine built around a single unfinished purpose. Everyone who meets Gus after that sees a man in total control. Nobody clocks the possibility that total control is just what grief looks like when it never gets to finish. Think about that. This is a man who built a fried chicken empire, a logistics network spanning a continent, a meth operation run with more discipline than most Fortune 500 companies could manage on their best day. And he did every bit of it with a stillness people mistake for mastery. Mastery over what, though? If the empire wasn't meant to replace what Gus lost, why does he spend decades expanding it instead of taking revenge the first chance he gets? And here's what most people miss. The empire was never the goal. It just looks like the goal. It's huge. It fills the whole screen. It's the thing the show spends the most time on. But watch what it's actually doing. Every restaurant, every shipment, every carefully managed relationship with the cartel, the DEA, the board members who genuinely believe he's just a respectable local businessman. None of that is the destination. It's infrastructure. If revenge had really been the destination, Gus could have settled for far less. He didn't need a multinational distribution network. He didn't need dozens of employees who never even knew his name. He didn't need to spend decades becoming one of the most powerful men in the Southwest. Instead, he builds something absurdly large. Because by then, he isn't just preparing for revenge anymore. He's preparing for a life organized around revenge. Gus isn't running an empire with a grudge tucked away on the side. It's the other way around. He's running a grudge, and the empire is just what it took to sustain a grudge of this size. You don't hold on to something this long without resources. Without patience, most people don't have. Without a kind of power, almost nobody gets to hold. And here's where it stops being simple. If the empire only exists because of Hector, what happens to the empire once Hector's gone? Once the debt's finally paid? Here's a question the last chapter skipped right past. How does a man wait this long? Not tactically. Gus has resources. Patience is a strategy. Fine. But psychologically, what does it take for a human being to hold on to one unfinished act for over 20 years without it eating him alive? Most people can't sustain wanting one thing for 20 years. Eventually, the obsession burns out, or it burns you out, unless it stops being wanting. Gus isn't patient despite the obsession. He's patient because of it. Somewhere in those 20 years, the obsession stopped sitting on top of his life and became the life. Not a feeling he's carrying, but a structure he's living inside. The restaurant openings, the board meetings, years spent proving himself useful to the DEA, slowly earning trust from a cartel that doesn't fully trust him yet. None of that is Gus waiting to get to Hector. That is Hector, spread across a decade. So the Empire was never a wall standing in front of the revenge. They became the same object. Every shipment is the ritual. Every friendly conversation with someone he's manipulating is the ritual. He's not counting down anymore. He stopped counting a long time ago. The waiting stopped feeling like waiting, which means something strange is happening to Gus that he probably doesn't notice himself. He's not living a life that's about to have a climax. He's living inside the climax, permanently. It just doesn't feel like one because it's been stretched out over 20 years and dressed up as a career. So here's where that leaves him. If waiting has become the entire structure of your life, what happens the day there's nothing left to wait for? This is the part that actually explains everything else, and it's got nothing to do with hate. At some point, Hector stops being the target of Gus's revenge. You never notice the moment it happens. Gus probably doesn't notice it either, because nothing changes on the surface. He still visits Casa Tranquila, still stands over Hector, still reminds him patiently that everyone he loved is gone. It all looks exactly the same, but underneath it, something has shifted. Think about what those visits actually accomplish. Hector can't hurt Gus anymore. He can't rebuild the cartel. He can't undo what happened to Max. Every practical reason for keeping him alive disappeared years ago. And yet Gus keeps coming back. Not because Hector can still change anything, but because as long as Hector is alive, something inside Gus never has to. That's the shift. Not immediately. So gradually, neither Gus nor the audience ever notices it happening. Because somewhere along the way, Hector stops being the destination. He becomes something much more dangerous. He becomes proof the story isn't over yet. Proof there's still something left to do. That tomorrow still has a purpose. That Gus is still, in some real sense, the man from that pool scene. Still suspended inside the same unfinished moment. Once you see that, Hector isn't really the enemy anymore. He's the alibi. As long as Hector's alive, ringing that bell, glaring back with whatever's left of that fury, Gus never has to answer the one question his entire identity was built to avoid. Who am I when this is finished? So if some part of Gus already understands exactly what's happening, why does he still need Hector alive when killing him would finally complete the mission? Which brings us back to Casa Tranquila. The bell, the bomb, wired underneath a Hector Salamanca who, for once, doesn't look angry. He looks almost peaceful. Like a man who finally understands exactly what he's about to do. Everyone remembers this as Gus's death scene. Fair enough. But that's the smaller story hiding a much bigger one. Here's the bigger one. Gus gets it. Everything he spent years building toward, he actually gets it. The debt's paid, the mission, the thing that had been giving the last version of his life its entire shape, is complete. And the second it's complete, there's nothing standing behind it. That's the real tragedy. Not that Gus dies, plenty of people die in this world. The tragedy is that he finally achieves the one goal that had been holding his identity together since Max's death decades earlier, and there was never a second act waiting on the other side of it. There was no Gus beyond Hector. There was only ever the version of Gus that Hector's existence made possible in the first place. So, go back to where we started. Why does Gus keep Hector alive? It was never really about revenge. That was just the surface. The part everyone could see. He keeps Hector alive because Hector is the last piece holding up an identity Gus built out of the wreckage of Max's death. A version of himself defined completely by one unfinished act. Kill Hector, and the mission ends. End the mission, and there's no reason left for that version of Gus to exist. Which means the real reason Gus needed Hector alive was never about punishing him. It was about needing somewhere left to go,